afternoon, wherever you are. I want to start off with a very belated Happy New Year to everyone. It's the next episode in our THC expert sessions, episode number 4 already, which means that we're going well, and it's a packed house today. All 200 seats are fully sold out. So I hope that this time confusion did not make other people lose this opportunity. So today, another exclusive talk about tech recruitment, and we have the privilege, to have Thom Staight today with us. He's the Director Global Talent Acquisition EMEA at Microsoft, and he's going to share some very, very insightful and valuable lessons he have acquired over his professional journey. All right, Thom?
No pressure. Okay.
No pressure. And also we have Hang Lee with us. I don't know if he needs any further introduction, but I think that everyone in the tech recruitment world loves listening to his contributions, and it's going to be a fireside chat today. And I'm giving the stage to the gentleman that, you guys sold out, so good job.
Great stuff. Thanks a lot, Damien. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this session. I'm really excited to be having this chat with Thom, because Thom, you don't know this, but I actually think you're one of the most talented and intelligent commentators in our industry. That is that very few people actually get the opportunity to see, because guess what? You actually have a job and you do your job. There's lots of people out there on the speaker circuit and they're going round and round. I'm one of those people. But there's other people that, they're practitioner first, they're doing the job. But now and again, on rare moments, they pop out and they give a talk, or they come out and they come onto some sort of panel, and the contribution is amazing. And I just feel very fortunate that we have the opportunity to have this conversation, Thom, because I'm excited to have a chat with you about your journey to where you're at now at Microsoft. And indeed, what are the things you've learned on the way, how tech recruiting and recruitment, the organization of recruitment might change as a result of hiring for a unique business. All of these things I think are going to be super interesting. The audience, as I anticipated, tend to be, I would imagine everyone here is like a tech recruiter, I guess. In fact, let me know in the comments who you are. I mean, it'd be interesting to know sort of who the audience is, but I'm assuming that most people here are working for tech companies, recruiting for software people, encountering all of those challenges, but doing it obviously with different brands and different styles of business. And it would be interesting to compare all of those companies with, Microsoft is probably one of the big daddies, right? I mean, after IBM, Microsoft is it's in the firmament as to what technology is. So really interesting to have this chat with you. But anyway, before we kick that off, can you give us a quick, pathway to how you got there, Thom? Because you came like everyone else from the agency world, didn't you? Didn't you do that? Yeah.
I did, yeah. By the way, thanks for being so nice. It's always nice to speak to you because you're always so kind. So thanks for the intro. I fell into recruitment in agency like most people do. So I didn't grow up wanting to be a recruiter. I just sort of walked into a recruiting agency and literally thought, this looks like a fun place to work, and I don't know what to do with my life. So I'll do this for a couple of years, and that'll help me work out what I actually want to do when I grow up. And I left the same agency about 15 years later. So, I was, by which point that was it. I was a recruiter.
That's it. It was like stamped.
There's no way to do anymore because, I've now got 20 years recruitment experience. But it's, in all seriousness, I kind of, I think a lot of people who have got some good people skills, good business acumen, I enjoyed selling, and in agency, I think all recruitment has got a strong thread of sales through it, but in agency, particularly, I'm old enough that it was back in the 90s that I started. So particularly back in the 90s, it really was all about selling. And if you enjoy all those things, then recruiting agency is a great place to be. And you learn really good, really robust fundamental recruiting skills. I think even today, the agency world has changed a lot, but even now it's a great place to get those kind of fundamentals.
On that note, Thom, what are those fundamentals? The things that you've seen, carry through to internal recruiting and then recruiting for a big corporate and all of those types of things. Because recruitment agencies tend to get denigrated, don't they, a little bit? And there's, even people that are like ex-recruitment agents tend to denigrate the place we came from, and we don't actually respect some of the life lessons and the professional skills that those places have taught us. So what would you say have been like the key things you've taken away from agency life?
I think if you think about it in terms of the candidate and the client cycle, on the candidate cycle, I don't think there's a better place to learn how to source. So, learning the different tools available to go out and, because, you live and die by the quality of candidates you can provide an agency, right? If you've got good candidates, people want to talk to you. And if you haven't, they don't. So you have to be good at sourcing. So I think, and it varies depending upon the agency you're in. But when we were setting up the sourcing team in Microsoft, which is the first job I joined, we specifically went out to find agency recruiters who'd worked in tech recruiting agencies, ideally agencies which didn't have their own big proprietary database. So they relied on building that sourcing muscle. So I still, even today, particularly in good small agencies, I think you find recruiters build amazing sourcing skills. And then the other part of it is that if you're in agency, you're mostly working contingent, you're mostly one of several suppliers. So even if you've got great candidates, you've still got to be able to manage the expectations and influence a hiring manager effectively. And a really good agency recruiter is the one who gets a placement and makes a fee, even when they haven't got the best candidate. And when you go, as you kind of, become more experienced and you move up the food chain and do more senior recruitment in agency, or if you go in-house and do a corporate job, that ability to set expectations right and manage and influence hiring managers, that is a core skill, regardless of if you're hiring an entry-level software engineer or you're negotiating hiring 200 all in one go. That core influencing capability, I think, is fundamental. That's a core skill.
Yeah, and I love that, Thom, because that ability to influence you can see it becoming even more important as the industry evolves. We're talking about how, and we're gonna touch on this, about how the internal recruitment function might need to adapt to changing environments and need to adapt to workforce composition changes, shift to remote. All of those things might be things that internal marketplace, all of those things that internal recruiters need to think about. But in every one of those pathways, the ability to influence the business is like one of the top things that you have got to be able to do.
And you see, and even there's a lot of very good people fall into recruitment through lack of knowing what to do with their lives. And then those core skills we just talked about, you see a lot of people then move out of recruitment in sort of after a few years or mid-career. It's those skills, that influencing, that ability to build a contract with someone, to manage a relationship. It's those skills which take them on to something else in the future as well. That might be in HR, it might be in sales, it could be in business management. So yeah, I agree. I think they're fundamental.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned actually, Thom, when you moved into the corporate world, in Microsoft, one of the first things you had to do was to set up a sourcing function. Can you give us a quick snapshot of the landscape before you arrived? So presumably there was not this function in that sort of situation.
Yeah, so this was now 6 years ago, more or less, and at that point, Microsoft had sourcers sitting in individual recruiting teams. So they'd broken out the sourcing role as being a standalone role, particularly where there was volumes of engineering recruiting being done.
Right.
But the key event in Microsoft 6 years ago was actually taking talent acquisition out of HR. So obviously we're a big international company, and outside the US, all of our recruiting teams reported up to the local geo HR director. And in a big country, that was fine. So in a country like the UK, which is a big market for Microsoft, there was enough recruiting demand that you had a big enough team that it could sustain its own team of recruiters, its own team of sourcers. You could afford to have a big team with domain expertise for engineering, for sales, for technical sales, etc. Where it didn't work as well is that if you're recruiting across a big region like EMEA, which we were trying to, there's lots and lots of smaller countries where you might end up, we can only sustain one person. And that one person has got to be amazing at everything, which we all know can't be done. You can't go from hiring a research level director on the one hand to then doing, a sales manager for cloud and then go across to doing something else over there. That's very, very hard to do to an excellent level all the time. So what they created talent acquisition as a standalone function. We still report to the board level HR director, and Microsoft has an HR person on the main board. But we have our own VP who runs the function globally, and we run on a regional basis. And one of the key reasons for doing that was enabled to sort of pool the resources on a regional basis, meant that we could really invest in sourcing. And if you think about where the world was 6 years ago and the direction of travel that's accelerated since then, there was a lot of talk about the war for talent, and how, particularly in some of the technical areas that we were trying to recruit in and still are trying to recruit in, we were trying to recruit the same small number of people that all the other big tech companies were, and we had to be much more focused around doing it. So the idea of becoming a regional organization, so being global, and then being an EMEA org and an Asia org, was that we can invest in things like sourcing. So it was my big break, really, because I was doing a fairly senior management role in agency, and I've been looking at, I got to the point where I was like, I don't want to do this for the next 20 years. And I looked at lots of other agencies who were interested in my experience, but I was like, that's just the same gig with a different sort of brand above the door, so I'm not sure I want to do that. Because Microsoft, at least in EMEA, felt that they wanted to go outside of the normal circles to think about recruiting differently, and particularly think about sourcing differently, I just sort of got lucky. They were looking for someone different at the time that I was looking for something different, and we found each other, which was great. So the first job I had was coming in and helping create this sourcing team.
That in itself is a really interesting segue, because I would imagine it's quite rare to see that type of like sideways move, if you like. So senior agency then going into senior corporate, where I've seen career tracks, typically people have moved in at an earlier period where they're still an operator, and then they've moved in-house, and then they've grown up sort of and ended up getting promoted to a certain level. So that in itself is an interesting story, but we probably don't quite have the bandwidth to talk about it right away. So we'll loop back on that if we can later. Tell me about when you had the landscape, okay, this is what we want to do. We want to centralize. We want to centralize. That means we invest more, and it means that the classic efficiency gains when you have, you're able to just consolidate the effort and not have that, most inefficient situation, which is basically, a recruiter having to spread themselves across multiple unrelated jobs. Because each one is a project, right? So that's just going to chew time. So how did you set about doing that, Thom?
So I mean, it was really hard. This is some of the conversations that you and I have had in the past, right? So we've met on the sourcing circuit. So a lot of, I didn't have all the answers, and soon after I joined, I really connected to all the different sourcing events and started to network with people who were either doing the same thing we were doing at the same time, or were kind of a few years ahead of us, to try and find out what people had learned. And when I started to talk about the structural problems, and there's a lot of structural problems about, you still have recruiters who have a focus by organization. So there might be an engineering organization or a sales organization, and you have recruiters who have a focus through geographic responsibility, because the company is still organized around country structures. Then as a sourcing team, you have to think about, we have this huge number of different requests, and we've never had, and it's appropriate, by the way, it wasn't, I never expected we would have enough sources to provide sourcing support to every open rec. Not every open rec needs it. But the first thing you need to do is you need to think about, when you look at this huge amount of hiring that's going on simultaneously, and you look at the limited amount of sourcing resource you've got, how do you go about deciding what's going to get the right amount of sourcing support? And not only have you got to decide that at a high level, and that's actually relatively easy, because we went back to, right, what's the company's mission? What's the company's strategy? What's the highest impact work the company is doing? So, if I was the chief exec, where would I want that sourcing support aligned? Probably not on that role over there, because it's replacing attrition, it's low impact, it's not supporting a customer, it's not building a product. So you at a high level, you can go, right, I can build a sort of set of criteria to decide how we align the work. But then, of course, when you're actually in the day-to-day, and every recruiting environment moves very quickly, it's a large portion of it is very reactive. I have no control over when the business are going to open their recs. In fact, the business don't even know when they're going to open their recs. So you have to be able to kind of have this framework which says, this is how we want to align finite resource to the work of greatest impact, of greatest strategic importance. But then you also have to work out, how do I keep the team optimally aligned to those principles when the business is randomizing the way in which it's opening that work and the way it's starting up new projects. And that was difficult. We built systems, we tried to automate it. We ultimately landed on something which meant that we were really very engaged, not just with our recruiting partners and recruiting manager partners, so that they understood how we would make those decisions, but we went one step further, and we really engaged with the business. which wasn't what I expected to do. I expected sourcing would be more of a behind the scenes function, but actually it became really clear that there had to be a level of leadership that understood that we have this sourcing function. This is the value the sourcing function brings, but we can only use it on a certain proportion of the work. So you need to help me manage the expectations of all the hiring managers that this is where we're going to align that sourcing support. And it took we didn't work this out like on day one. We made a lot of mistakes, or actually I made a lot of mistakes. So, but by sort of year 2, year 3, we started to get real clear alignment on where do we bring value, where does the business want us to bring value, and then all the people down the chain, not just in recruiting, but our HR partners, the leaders in the business, they all understood the principles about where we were going to apply that. That was probably the single most difficult thing to get sorted.
It sounds like something that would take a lot of chew. Simply, there's a size and scale issue, obviously. That it compounds the size of the challenge. If you're all working pre-COVID, but if we're all working in one office, then probably it'll be a lot shorter sort of time frame to get that part of it done. But if you're distributed across multiple offices, different time zones, different territories, then that's going to just take a huge amount of effort. I wonder, so you mentioned something really interesting, and I think this is something that would resonate with a lot of people watching this, in the sense that recruiters often are reacting to requisitions that are created in a way that is unpredictable.
Yeah.
Or let's say we failed to predict it rather than unpredictable. So did you do anything to help the business give you a little bit more of a runway? Because typically what happens in recruiting is that the first time a recruiter knows is demand is when an email comes in saying we need 25 people. And it's like, oh my God, I can't do it, And that's when we start, and it's like too late by then, because of course, by the time that email's been sent by the business actually does need those people. So was there any workforce planning, I guess? Like, was there anything that you did to try and help the business give recruiters earlier notice?
Yeah, we did. And I would have to separate the answer into what we call go-to-market, so the whole customer-facing sales and marketing end of the business, which is big. And actually in EMEA, that's 2/3 or more of our total hiring. And then engineering, which is sort of 50% of hiring globally, but about a third of what we do in EMEA. On the engineering side, I'll be completely honest, we haven't fixed it at all. I guess the key thing we've done is we've recognized that we were engaging as a function, we were engaging too much at the hiring manager level or at the M2 manager level. Whereas actually where we needed to engage was, right up at the sort of the VP level, which for us is kind of chief exec -1, -2. And they're not the people opening the recs, but they're the people who are looking at scale across broadly, when am I going to release to my hiring managers, the recs, or when am I going to tell them they can start hiring? The problem with engineering, and the reason we haven't solved it there, is that the engineering organization intentionally builds this incredible degree of agility into the way they do things. And that's intentional, right? So we have to be agile, because part of our engineering is agile to build what customers want when they want it. So you don't build out cloud capacity and then have it sitting there doing nothing, because that in itself costs money. So you've got a very close link to the customer via the sales teams to know, right, this is what the sales pipeline looks. That's when these customers are going to want to come online. So you're building just in time, right? So you don't end up with spare capacity. So that in itself is reactive. The other place you need agility is in your product development and your R&D. And you have to be agile there, because while you're doing R&D on something, either sometimes the thing you test with a customer, they take you by surprise. The thing you think they're going to love, they're like, okay. But the thing you think was just like a cool idea, they go crazy for. And suddenly you've got to sort of switch everything you're doing across to that new feature or that new product, and that scales up really quickly. So it's the right customer orientated behavior to retain that agility. The downstream impact of that on lots of functions, but particularly recruiting, is that they can't tell us more than about a month ahead of time what they think they're going to want to recruit, or even where they're going to want to hire it, which is the real challenge. So sometimes I talk to a VP, who's based in Seattle, which is where HQ is for us, and we're like, we're going to invest heavily in this product. Okay, cool. Well, that's, we've got distributed development teams on that product. We've got them in China. We've got them in Europe. We've even got a few in Latin America. So which teams are you going to use to invest? Oh, no idea. So, trying to sort of pin them down on where they're going to invest and looking at all the different factors which affect where they're going to invest. Again, that's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. It's like I'm not going to try and tell anyone I've got an answer on that at all.
That's really great to hear the candor there, Tom, and that as you put it into the context of the requirement to be very reactive to customer needs, sensitive to customer needs, then there's cascade effects all the way down through the process. And as you say, just-in-time product delivery might mean just-in-time resourcing, because the alternative is simply to have loads of people on the bench, and that doesn't work well with human beings generally. You know, engineers, they can't be sitting there twiddling their thumbs. They get demotivated. They need work to do. So, you know, there may not be an alternative option there.
One thing I would say, though, that you can do, and we have done, is we have educated, we think, fairly effectively about how long it actually takes to hire an engineer. And not only how long does it take to hire, but how long does it take to hire in different parts of the world based on things like supply of available talent. So where the business has got better is they've recognized that we can actually add a bit of value to that decision-making process by saying things like, depending upon the skill set you're looking for, you know, there are different areas, different development centers we already have, because we have a big global footprint and it's growing. We would recommend taking that piece of development work to this location, because this is what the sustainable supply of talent for that looks like, not just to hire the initial team, but in the long term. And the other thing to factor in is that a lot of, you know, we're a US company, most of our leaders are US based. Even if they aren't US nationals, which a lot of them aren't, they're now US based. So they have a US frame of reference. And then the US doing a background check is generally done in under a week. A notice period is a week max, right? So I make you an offer today, I expect you to start in a couple of weeks. If you hire someone in parts of Europe, the background check takes 2 weeks plus. The notice period is quite likely 3 months. I mean, we're not hiring junior people, we're hiring mid to senior engineers. And, you know, sometimes you talk to a leader who's not used to hiring in Europe, and that kind of thing blows their mind. So so there's what we've got better at is like educating on the factors to take into account on their planning, and then trying to influence a bit more around the planning about, look, don't go there if that's an issue, go here if you're looking for this kind of talent. For example.
You know, it sounds to me this could be like a really quick. It could be a product. It'd be cool if you could input something to say, right, I'm hiring for these engineers, like, and have the system spit back at you. You give them the parameters as to when you need them, how you get them, how much you've got to pay, etc., and then there's some sort of return where people can give you a recommendation. So right now that's you doing it, right? Or you members
invented your new startup, Hong. That's salary.
That's a spreadsheet. That's Excel, isn't it? So well, we could do this.
You know, there's the one thing I will share is that obviously Microsoft acquired LinkedIn, and I forget how many years ago now. Before we acquired LinkedIn, we were using LinkedIn Recruiter. We were doing these giant searches, you know, breaking down different kind of searches by skill. We were using name strings to try and get diversity readings, that kind of stuff. And when we acquired LinkedIn, there's clear walls between Microsoft and LinkedIn as part of the terms of the deal. But LinkedIn did reach out to us as their customer zero, who they were asking us to trial stuff. And we sat down and they said, what do you use LinkedIn for? So we showed them all this stuff we were doing. And we were like, honestly, this takes so long. And you guys could just flick a switch and make this happen automatically. And they were like, oh, yeah, that'd be really easy. So out the back of that, they ended up building what is now LinkedIn Talent Insights, which you may or may not have seen. The stuff that used to take us literally 2 days work to create a lovely presentation showing breakdowns of talent in different geos. I mean, you can literally do it in like 30 seconds using Insights. So, you know, that conversation we've just had, if you were to sit down with LinkedIn and go, hey, look, this is, or we could even share the spreadsheets we use for a similar kind of exercise, then the team over there are quite, you know, they like these kind of ideas. That's how product generation happens, I think, for the LinkedIn team.
You know what? That's a fascinating story, because one of the things that is fascinating about the data that LinkedIn does have is this global reach. It's you know, there's not many organizations that you can really think of that would have a bigger reach than LinkedIn in terms of, you know, distribution of skills, let's say, something of that type. And, you know, to be able to get access to some of that via the Talent Insights product, I think some of you guys might be using it already. I think it's a vital thing. But this idea of being able to report back on the sort of location of skills is even more important in the post-COVID era, isn't it? Because suddenly, you know, what is the sort of posture there? Because you already have this global footprint, right? So you got a global footprint, but it's not like universal. You've got big offices and big territories where you think, right, there's lots of engineers there. But now with, let's say, a shift to remote working, if there is a policy for something like that in Microsoft, presumably you can unlock the world's talent potentially to open up. Or is it still a case, you know what, it has to be getting into an office in this territory?
I've probably got sort of two parts to an answer on that. So the easy answer, the first part, is that the trend for us, and we're talking particularly of tech recruiting here, the trend has been really, really strongly for years now to do more of our hiring for tech recruiting outside the US. And it's driven really by availability of talent. And that when we look at long-term trends, and the company does not just look at, you know, what can we do now in the next 12 months, we're also looking at, we want to build a sustainable business, which is hopefully going to need to be bigger in 5 years and 10 years time. So if we're going to do that over a 5-10 year period, what does that look like, not just today, but in the future? So for that reason, you know, we'll continue to grow in markets which have got a huge supply of really good talent, like India and China. The scale of those talent markets is just off the chart. So there's loads of capacity to grow there. But we're also, probably the most exciting thing I've certainly done at Microsoft and possibly ever, was helping set up our first development centers in Africa. And the intention of going there was, when you look at the demographics in Africa, and you look at the youth of the population, you look at the growth of the university population, the number of new graduates that are coming out every year, the number of computer science graduates coming out every year, is growing almost exponentially. It's just incredible. And when you think about kind of untapped areas of the world, you know, India, China, you know, our existing centers in Europe, in the US, they're intensely competitive. Every company is there. And part of the reason we're going to Africa was that we recognized that really that was I wouldn't say it was completely untouched, because there are some great African companies there, and there's a few Western companies who've got presence there, but not at scale. And we recognise that actually, if we built our employer brand in those areas, and if we built a footprint and infrastructure there, our ability to scale up in that region over time would be significant. Of course, you can't just go somewhere and hire 1,000 people straight away. You have to build manager capability. You have to hire the first 100, 200 people, identify the future manager styles out of that, and build their capability, and then you can hire the next waves, and so on and so forth. So it is a multi-year strategy to do that. We're in 2 countries at the moment. We'll be in, we don't know how many at the moment, but we're certainly going to be in 5 within the next few years, and each of those will scale gradually over time. And that's with like a 5 to 10 year horizon. That's the sort of the vision on doing that.
You know, that's really massively significant. One of the things that is true in our industry, recruiting in general, is that the awareness of what is happening in Africa is very, very poor. Like essentially, it's US dominant dialogue. I mean, most things that we talk about in recruiting, the ideas, the frameworks, the case studies, they're all coming out of the US, if not maybe a few bits in Europe, etc. But we don't know anything really about what's happening in Far East. Don't know anything about India really. And Africa is literally the old school Conradian dark continent as far as sort of recruiting is concerned. So it's fascinating getting in there, because you're also going to, not only is the plan there, but you're going to learn so much more about how talent flows in those territories and in those cultures, and give you a massive advantage if you ever needed that resource.
So to your point about the talent is different, the way the talent moves is different, and you talked about the stretch of LinkedIn. LinkedIn's got loads of people on it in Africa, but LinkedIn will acknowledge, they won't sort of tell me what they think it is, but their coverage of the population, the skilled population in those markets, is way less than it is in Europe and North America. So as a recruiter, you've got to understand, well, how else do I go out and find the talent? And we've hired teams now in Kenya and Nigeria, recruiter teams. They're all, some of the guys have been here 18 months, some of them have been here only a few months. But not only the quality of software engineer is brilliant, but the quality of recruiter and talent sources we're hiring out there is amazing. And they're doing, the way in which they're going out and finding and engaging with talent has to be different, because they can't just find everybody on GitHub and LinkedIn. So my team is now, we've got recruiters in Africa who are not just hiring for us in Africa, they're starting to do work for us in Europe, and absolutely killing it in Europe, because they're bringing skills and ways of working which work for them in their own market. They're applying them to our existing dev centers in Dublin and Norway, and doing a brilliant job. So there's a at the moment, this is really early days for us, but at the moment it's been an amazing shot in the arm for my team to get us to think differently, to be stimulated. and that's only going to happen more. We've got the COVID thing is holding us back a bit, because a lot of what we want to do is about building our own communities and then engaging. There's lots and lots of coding schools and community groups and meetups and things, even more so in some of those markets. Like Lagos has got this huge startup community, huge meetup community of devs, and of course at the moment they're not really meeting up, so we can't plug into it in the same way. But that's being able to engage with communities like that is frankly not a skill that we've had to use very much in Europe. We've done a bit of it, but because LinkedIn and GitHub are so good and have such great coverage, and you can do stuff so quickly through them, we don't put time into those other things. And then suddenly you hire recruiters whose instinct is not to go straight to GitHub, but to do something different. And you're like, oh wow, that's really cool, and that works really, really well. So I think it will change the way in which we, the breadth of tools we use and the breadth of routes to market that we use across the whole region over time.
You know what? That's fascinating. I don't know what everyone else thinks, but I'd love to be able to speak to some of those Kenyan and Nigerian recruiters to learn exactly how they do it, because it is one of the interesting things about. I mean, by the way, I knew the coverage of LinkedIn is generally very much in North America, Europe, basically, and slanted even Western Europe, if you think about it, because not much in Eastern Europe, Russia, stuff like that, not happening. Zero in places like China, for instance, like 1 billion people there. Africa itself has probably got 1 billion people in total. And again, big black hole. LATAM is another one where I would say LinkedIn is not particularly prominent even. So big territories with billions of people. We're not even thinking about it. But in this remote world where, if we're recruiting talent from wherever the place, it's a global competition, we recruiters have got to get onto this, because if we're sticking with the classic, stick an advert out or search LinkedIn, every other recruiter on the planet is doing the same at minimum, and you're going to be outcompeted.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Okay, let's talk about sort of the structure of the sourcing team. So we know right now the sourcing team is centralized. This is a multi-year project. You put it all together in this way. How else is it structured in terms of things like career path and journey through it and stuff like this? Have you thought about that aspect of it, Thom?
Yeah, I worked leading the sourcing team for about 3 years, and then about 3 years ago I moved across to start leading the engineering recruiting team, and one of the other managers on the sourcing team stepped up to lead, and he's evolved the structure slightly. So we always set up sourcing to enable a degree of domain expertise. So we'd have some sources who are focused on engineering recruiting, some focused on our consulting organization, some on different types of sales, so more technical sales versus account sales. So we always try to have a degree of domain expertise, but retain some flexibility. We're actually, Microsoft is, you mentioned it, Microsoft is really big, right? So one of the difficulties of setting up any service is both the breadth and the volume you've got to deliver, but also that size means you've got massive diversity. So there are areas where we have consistency. We talk about our core and common workloads, which would be our higher volume workloads. If I keep using engineering as an example, there is what we talk about as our sort of core full stack engineering profile. And that will be from a sort of a junior level up to a mid-career level. And we hire a lot of those people. And we intentionally don't hire them with a particular expertise in a particular coding language or anything else, because we know from experience that what we require of engineers changes all the time. So if you're working on one product this year and you're going to be working in that particular language, we actually might want you to pivot in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, completely different product, completely different language. We don't want to get rid of you and hire somebody else. We want you to be smart enough. We hire very, very strongly on learning agility. So we want you to be able to retool and reskill quickly so you can then move across and do something else. So for our volume work, what we try to do is we try to make sure we're clear about different profiles we're hiring against. So there might be 3 core profiles. A full stack software engineer is the biggest one we hire, or I say the highest volume one we hire. We then have a back end profile we hire for, and we have a front end profile we hire for. And that accounts for about 55% of all the engineering work we'll hire in the EMEA region.
Do you have other sources or recruiters segmented against those templates? Yeah.
So not forever, because going back to your point about career paths, if you want someone to be stimulated by the work they do, right? So you shouldn't impose your own way of thinking on anyone, but I need to refresh what I'm doing on a regular basis. But where we're those scale workloads, which we're doing in high volume, both the sourcing team and the recruiters who are partnering with them, they will be 100% focused against one of those core profiles, against one of those pipelines. And that enables us to drive real efficiency and real volume in it. And we've got some talent sources and some recruiters who just love that, right? They really complement the profile. They understand that market inside out, and they've done it for years and want to do it for years. But for a lot of people, they'll do that for a period, and then they'll say, right, I've done that, I got good at that. Now I want to freshen up and go and do something else. And what we've done both on the recruiting and on the talent sourcing side is try to make sure that we've created distinct different sets of roles aligned to different workloads. There might be a different domain workload. It might be leadership, hiring and sourcing versus kind of mid-career hiring and sourcing. What we've tried to do, and we're continuing this evolution at the moment actually, because my team's about to grow to respond to a greater business demand. We're taking some more steps down that road of specialization, because as the volume goes up, the demand for recruiters and sources who can really dive deep into an area that we need to go further into. So we need to be better at it. We need to learn more about it. The business needs more of that, and actually that enables more career opportunity for people.
Yeah, excellent stuff. It just occurred to me, like, how do the recruiting setup react to new technologies? Is it a case that you already know what's down the pipe and you think, right, maybe the demand isn't there right now, but we're going to be recruiting, let's say, a bunch of AI engineers or whatever it is down the line. I need to start positioning my sourcing team and orientating them around what may be a newish type role. So you mentioned full stack, back end, front end, whatnot. Rewind back pre-cloud, like those roles didn't exist because everyone's a computer programmer, let's say, or analyst programmer back in the day. So I guess what I'm saying is there did you anticipate what a future technical role might look like, and then start to build a sourcing team around that, or is that is that too far future focused? It's too distant to be practical.
I think that's the sort of thing we'd like to do. But I think that we're just never resourced. Although, let's be honest, I have to remind myself, looking into Microsoft from the outside, we're a really well-resourced recruiting function, right? So I'm not. This is not me complaining, saying, "Oh, I don't have enough people." I don't have enough people, but we have enough that we can do the kind of thing you're talking about. Can we always deliver the degree of market intelligence, competitor intelligence? Like that kind of information around skills profiles and what are the skills that are building the market. We'd love to do more of that, but the honest truth is that it's difficult for us to do it at scale. The benefit we have in Microsoft is that we have got proper pure research functions. So we can look at what they're developing, and they give us a pretty good idea about, okay, what are the next generation of products that are coming, and what are the skills that are going to be required for that. So I remember when I joined 6 years ago, and we were first talking about how hard it was to find the 10 good machine learning engineers in London. And I talked to one of the leaders, and he was like, within about 3 or 4 years, every software engineer will either be able to work in machine learning or they won't have a job. And I thought he was mad. And I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. This is so niche. That's ridiculous. But of course, now it's completely true. Machine learning is not a niche skill. If you're a software engineer,
mandatory.
Not every software engineer has to do this, but you need to understand the principles. You go and do a computer science degree now, or as you study software engineering, it's a core part of software engineering, and we're now at the point where we're starting to build the software which will write the software in the future. That's So I think the benefit of our research function is being able to sit down and talk to them, look at what they're speccing out to my team, and that's some of the coolest recruitment we do, where they're like, right, we've got the intersection of where this thing meets this thing. We need that knowledge and experience to add to this research team building this product. And you look at that work, and you look at where the call outs are and what the different skill areas and knowledge and domain areas they're adding in, and you can think, right, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, that's what's going to be scaling. That's what our customers are going to want to be buying, and that's the point where we that will become a core skill. That won't be a niche research skill. That'll be a core skill. So I think that does give us some insight. But there's so many research things going on. They're not all going to work. They're not all going to see the light of day. And some of them, customers will say, actually, we don't have a need for that. But there's some things there which we can be fairly certain will hit the big time.
Fantastic. You talk about research, and it just brought to me kind of a newish development, I guess, in the recruiting space. This idea of like talent intelligence, where there's maybe a function where you do things like competitor analysis and you do market research on skills availability and stuff like this, which I'm sure every recruiter, operational recruiter, would do a bit of, but maybe it's like impossible to do when you've got 30 requirements to fill. You can't do it at that level. Do you see a function popping out to be a specialist in this area in Microsoft and in other businesses, or do you see it as it's not part of recruiting? You'd have to tap in another part of the business to get that info.
No, it is a part of recruiting, but also so we have some resources dedicated to doing it, but it's a tiny number in the context of, I don't even know how many are in recruiting in Microsoft now, but it's like 1,600 or something globally. And in that context, it's less than 10 people who are doing true talent intelligence work, and most of them out of the US. But some of the interesting work that team would do is that you would reach out to the business intelligence teams that are supporting sales development and sales strategy. And in each of the engineering areas, they've also got their own intelligence teams. And where a lot of the really interesting work gets done is where we bring our information, which is largely external talent market data. And then, the business brings their data, which will, come from a completely different point. And then you get really smart people who start building data models where they put all this stuff in and they share graphics, which blow your mind. And that's suddenly where you get some really, truly interesting insights. So I think that recruiting, yes, there should be that function in recruiting. And even just at a very low level, even sitting down in front of LinkedIn Talent Insights for 10 minutes before going in to see a senior leader and understanding more about kind of their geo or their domain and what's the talent they're hiring and what can I see externally in the market and what can I see their competitors doing. Even doing that changes the conversation you have with the leader. That fundamentally changes the conversation because your credibility is completely different. Suddenly you've got something which they're interested in, something they can feed into their decision making. So it should be a part of recruiting, right? And it should be part of the way we influence big business decisions as well as small scale hiring decisions. But where it can have massive impact is where you don't just keep it in recruiting, you connect with every other part of the company, which is bringing its own data. And that's where, if you can get the collaboration right, you can get the people with the right data skills to get the insights, that's where it becomes really transformational. We did a big piece of work on skills, and we combined people from recruiting, from the business looked at organically how the organization itself, how people were reskilling themselves through their own accord internally. They brought in the comp team. We brought in competitor intelligence, which is a function in our sales organization. That was amazing. We looked at how the skills map of Microsoft had changed intentionally. So where the company had said, we need more of A, B, and C, but also we're able to map, well, actually, how's the skills profile of our existing organization changed unintentionally? So what are people going out and learning for themselves, or kind of without us even noticing, people have picked up this other set of skills, and what does that mean about where we are? So those kind of things are amazing. I mean, that's where the real magic happens.
You know what? That leads us very nicely to a next point on the journey of recruiting is, what are we doing with the internal mobility side of it? This is a conversation I think is definitely happening in the wider marketplace, particularly for smaller organizations that, during the last 12 months or so, a lot of recruiters who traditionally been focused purely on external, bringing outside in, recruitment stopped. The requirement was to redeploy people, and recruiters were tasked with that. And then suddenly, a lot of recruiters had to look internally to think, okay, we can maybe reposition this team into that area or this person into that place. And that's like internal mobility. Do Microsoft have an internal mobility team dedicated to this, or is it kind of just floating out there in the sense that the individual employee needs to activate the journey? How does it work in there?
So it's evolved over time. So the company I joined came from a cultural place where it was like everyone owned their own career, and the idea was it was set up without barriers. So if I wanted to go and work in your team, I could just go and reach out and say, hey, I think your team's really cool and I think you're cool. Can I come and work for you? And you'd say, yeah, when I've got a spot on my team, you'd post a job and I could apply and go. But it was driven by the individual, and you're responsible for that. And there's still an element of that. So there's still an expectation that, and we try and set up the kind of policies and structures and so forth so that people can find it easy to apply for things and move internally that way. We've invested an awful lot more in intentional talent management, though, and this is the direction the company is going in. Some of it comes from that pressure we spoke about before, that there's a global shortage of talent in lots of the areas we're looking for, and all the companies that are operating in the same space as us, particularly in the cloud space, they're all great companies, right? So if you're someone who's got an in-demand set of skills, there's 3 massive companies doing it: Google, Amazon, and Microsoft. They're all great companies, and there's a bunch of other people who probably hire you as well. They're also pretty good companies. So there's a recognition you have to work really hard to retain people, and you also if you've already got a good person, and if you've hired them at the start, and you've hired them on not just are they good at the job you're hiring them for, but you're hiring them on things like their learning agility. You're hiring them for, do they have a growth mindset? Are they willing to innovate and change and learn and grow? Well, if the answer is yes, then and they're fundamentally a high capability individual, well, that means you should be able to move them around. And our talent management function has grown from being very small 5-6 years ago, when it was focused just on succession plans and career paths for the most senior exec positions, and it's becoming much larger, and it's working its way down the organization. I'll be honest, we're not, for most of our ICs, whether it be engineers or salespeople, we don't have intentional career pathing for all of those people. We're a big company, and building that takes an awfully long time. But one of the significant things that's changed is the way in which we, as a talent acquisition function, set up. When we were created outside of HR 6 years ago, we were specifically targeted with bringing in external talent. There was a recognition that we had to grow and change very quickly, and a lot of the cloud skills and cloud thinking we needed, we just didn't have. So part of our cultural change we were going through was, right, TA, we're going to bring in loads of people like me who came with agency skills, and we are going to target you on how high a percentage of open requisitions are filled with external candidates. And that was what we were driven at, and we were really good at it. We went from just doing loads of internal hiring to doing tons of external hiring, and that worked. But we then reached a point where we said, okay, we have expanded a lot as a company. We've now got all these great people, and actually we now need to think about, and we talk a lot about right talent, right place, right time. So as the customer need changes, as the engineering need changes, you're in the right spot for the last 2 years, doing a brilliant job with great impact. But actually your ability to impact on customers in the next 2 years in that place is far more limited where you are today than if you're over there. So actually, talent acquisition, your function needs to become more about, if you know the talent in the organization, how can you help facilitate better, quicker internal movement? Now, there's a whole load of cultural stuff that goes around making that happen, which I'll be honest, we're still working with. We haven't yet got to the point where me and my team are allowed to go and headhunt people internally like we can do externally, which I think would be an amazing place to get to. But we are taking some fairly significant steps. We've taken away that external KPI from recruiting. That's no longer a focus. Mm-hmm. It's now, there's much clearer focus around, it's the right talent. That could be an internal person, it could be an external person, but you have to help the hiring manager put the best possible person in the role. And increasingly that means that the recruiter's role has gone from being a sourcer and job filler to being a much more of a consultant with the hiring manager. And that bit we spoke about before around bringing in more data and more market intelligence. Every hiring manager thinks they need kind of very specific set of skills for their role. And quite often the role the recruiter plays is say that we don't think we can find that very specific set of skills for the role. We can find this closer match externally and a similar closer match internally, but the person internally has already got a proven capability to learn and grow, because look what they've done in the previous 3 to 4 years. So there's then the role the recruiter plays in that hiring decision suddenly becomes quite different.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And this is a problem, I think, or a problem and an opportunity every business is wrestling with. Like, how do we unlock the internal talent pool and get beyond, obviously, the cultural things I think we all understand. A hiring manager is going to be, or a line manager, departmental manager is going to be defensive about his or her team. They don't want to see their people leave because it means an additional problem for them. So you've got a big disincentive at the hiring manager level. But at the same time, at a higher strategic point, what you want is never to lose that talent externally when there could be a home for them in the business. Because you've just, where else would they go other than to a direct competitor? So you've helped them get their competitor get better. You've got worse, and there could have been another opportunity in the business where this person could have had additional value.
But getting past that cultural piece, I mean, that's really hard. Like it's very hard as a manager when you're tasked, especially a fast-growing business like Microsoft with ambitious targets, with customers who are very demanding, if you're putting your life and soul into building a team to meet all those expectations, you expect sometimes to lose people to competitors, because we have great competitors. But to lose it to somebody internally, that can feel very, very difficult. If you're spending your whole life trying to build a brilliant team, it's natural to think of them as my team. So then when you sort of start seeing them move internally, that can be difficult. And some managers are great at it. Some managers are so people-centric and so team-centric. It's all about the individual. But if you've still got a customer need to meet, or you've got a product delivery deadline to meet for an engineering team, and you suddenly lose your best person, one half of your brain goes, yeah, that's amazing for that person. That's going to make their career. The other half goes, but we're going to miss our deadline. My best person's now not going to be here to do the thing they need to do for me. And that is hard. I haven't got the answer for it. It just is hard.
It may end up being a trade-off, right? I mean, it's not going to satisfy everyone. We have to maybe accept that. And I just wonder whether you do probably need to explicitly incentivize managers, give them a counterweight, because if it is the case that it's up to the individual character of the manager, then actually the manager that wants the people to do well might get penalized in terms of productivity, performance, etc., because they're great at not holding people back. And the managers that sadly are quite good at causing people not to want to leave, let's say, I'm sure that happens more than we would like to think. They sort of get rewarded for that. So there's things that we need to really tease and think about at a really senior level. But like I say, it's a huge challenge, very interesting. And it's going to be interesting to see which companies succeed in making that balance work. Because like you say, high demand skills, they're going to go to direct competition. Maybe even more so now, if things are remote, for instance, then the friction to change is actually significantly reduced, right? So maybe you don't need to move this person to Seattle anymore, which would have previously been a huge barrier had they been in a certain location working for a competitor business. Competitor business might be able to say, hey, stay where you are.
And I think that's and we didn't talk about that earlier on. We talked about talent. I think the bit around flexible working is something that we definitely haven't solved yet. I don't think any of the other major tech companies have really solved it. There's been some big headline publicity announcements, particularly by Facebook, around what you can do as an engineer, and I don't know how that's landing internally. But there's we've got lots of conversations happening at the moment exactly on that point that you're talking about, which is that person there wants to work for us. They would be incredible in that engineering team over there, but they don't want to relocate their family from where they're living. They might be in Warsaw, and that dev team is currently in Prague, but that dev team's not been in the office for 12 months. So does it actually matter if the manager of the team is going to be in Warsaw? But I think we still haven't solved what that means in the future. There's a consensus that nobody expects to go back to the office 5 days a week. And actually in Microsoft, very few people were in the office 5 days a week. We have to kind of eat our own lunch. We kind of sell the world the ability to cloud enabled. And I go to the office like once or twice a week, and that's mostly for the social connection with my team, because just they're a nice bunch of people to hang out with. It gets me out of the house a little bit. But for some of our dev teams, it's very comfortable to say, if we all live in the same area and we go in 1 or 2 days a week, so we can do things like code reviews, and we can when we're looking at systems architecture, we can stand around the same whiteboard and we can work on it together. That's much harder to say, well, how are we going to replace that and do it fully remote, or where half the team is in the office around a whiteboard and the other half are online somewhere else? And I think we haven't fully solved it. We've got some teams who clearly the work can be 100% distributed, no problem at all. And we've got some teams where clearly people need to be in a lab working on hardware. We've got some hardware engineering teams and research teams where you have to be in the lab with the equipment. But I think for a lot of our teams that sit in between, we're yet to say exactly what that's going to look like. And having spoken to a couple of peers recently in other tech companies, I think they're in a similar place as well. It's easier if you're a small company. If you've got 65,000 engineers around the world, finding the right sort of approach that's suitable for all 65,000 is challenging, to say the least. So.
Yeah, not only challenging, but there's a concept called collaboration intensity, isn't there? So in other words, how intensive is your job in terms of interacting with other people? Yeah. And the more intense it is, the bigger the pull to do on premise. because the work actually is intensely collaborative. There's other stuff that isn't so, and maybe that can be more distributed. So I suspect maybe there may be a way in which we could measure that, to figure out sort of what the role definition is, to say, look, and then right at the beginning when you're hiring for it, that you can remove the conversation by saying, look, this role has collaboration intensity up here, basically means you've got to be in this location. And then you don't have that really difficult situation where you're asking people to change when they've already set up a system or a process where they've got to work this way. So it is fascinating, no doubt. And like you say, I think all tech companies, they're struggling and wrestling with this. Thom, we're coming to the end of this chat. So I want to, before we hit the 2 questions, I want to just ask you a few questions that you can share with the audience. You've 20 years experience. You've kind of got to the point to senior leadership, one of the biggest brands in the world. You've probably made a bunch of mistakes. You've probably had a load of victories as well. Are there a few things that you could tell, budding recruiters out there? What kind of lessons have you picked up in your journey that you can say, you know what, this is quite an important lesson to learn. If you keep that close to your chest, that's going to serve you well.
Oh God, that's a big question. Do you mean as a manager, or do you mean as a recruiter, or what sort of?
I would say, as a person that's got to a degree of success, let's say. I mean, your journey is by no means over. So, but let me emphasize that. I'm sure there's further places to go. But, there's a lot of people out there that might look at your career path and where you're at right now and think, yeah, that's awesome. How do I get there? What would you say to those folks?
Okay, I think, I can answer it in that sense. I think the way you framed what it takes to do anything for 20 years is quite a good way of starting. And I think that I used to work in a company where making mistakes wasn't something that was necessarily talked about or tolerated, right? So on the one hand, the company would say, we want to innovate. On the other hand, if you tried something and it didn't work, you were absolutely smashed for it in every way, right? So you had a black mark against your name, it hit your bonus and everything, you didn't get access to projects, all those kind of things. And I think you have to, the beauty of Microsoft is that's completely the opposite of the Microsoft mentality. And I think most innovative companies, truly innovative companies, wouldn't take that. And I think when you're looking at your career, I think you have to go into it by kind of thinking, I'm going to make a bunch of mistakes at different points, and that's okay, because they're going to be learning experiences. And I think that one of the key things I've learned is if you put yourself in an environment where not only is making mistakes accepted as just part of life and part of learning, but to some extent it's actually encouraged. And I'm not saying that my boss tells me to go and screw things up, but she does sort of. Sometimes we have a conversation about what the right answer is to something, and I'm like, I'm not sure it is the right answer, but I think it might be, and we'll learn quite a lot by doing it. And she's like, well, let's just give it a go and let's see what happens. And I've had enough experience of trying things, and some things have worked and some things definitely haven't worked. That I've learned more in the 5 years I've been in Microsoft than probably in the previous 15 years. Because if you're in a risk-averse environment and you don't go out and try new things, you're not given the freedom to go out and try new things, then you just don't learn as quickly, putting it bluntly. And I think as a manager, it's changed me a lot as a manager in the last 5 years as well. I've always tried to be, ever since I've been a people manager, I've always tried to give people a high degree of autonomy and let them have real accountability for the work they're doing. But there's a difference between making someone accountable and then the way in which you make them accountable and the freedom you give them to then go and do their job, and how you create the right environment to try new things. And that's true in recruitment as it is in engineering or anything else.
Yeah, fantastic. I think we're going to all learn from that. It's almost like you've got to find the right environment or create the right environment that is permissive in this way. Because without the experimentation, as you say, you can spend years and years and years, and actually you can crunch the value of that time down to a really short period of time because you're not learning too much. Thom, we're running short of time ourselves, but let me just get quickly to these questions. There's a couple that have been asked, and I want to get to them. Okay, this one from Diogo real quick. He said, how to segment or specialize a TA team when you don't have a load of resources. Okay, thoughts on segmentation. Okay, so he wants to basically say, I'm growing my TA team from 1 person to 20 people. Mm-hmm. How do you segment it as you go to that 20 number? Is there a way, what kind of distribution would you throw at that?
So I guess there are probably three ways you could think about doing it, depending upon what your environment is. And I think that one of them would be, if it's on a regional basis, like EMEA-wide, then there are geographic differences. So you need to think about what are the factors that would impact, and are there particular geos I would roll up together because they share some similarity, and that shared knowledge would enable someone to be successful if they just concentrate on those geos. The other thing would be domain expertise, and there are good recruiters can recruit anything, but there are certain domains where if you don't have any domain knowledge, whether it be about software engineering or hardware engineering or what makes a great account manager in a sales environment, it's much harder to be effective at recruiting. So I think that you've got geo, you've got domain, and then probably the last one, which is one which we've really tuned into more in Microsoft in the last few years, is about the hiring motion. We've much more differentiated between what is the hiring motion, both in terms of the assessment we require the business to do, but also what's the work that goes into the sourcing of the candidate, the processing of the candidate. So what's that engagement with the business going to look like? And how's that going to be different? It might be about structure, it might be about process, it might be about time. But if you have recruiters who share, it might be a set of recs or set of organizations that all require the same hiring motion, then it's much easier for one recruiter to get scalability and expertise on that.
Yeah, really, really important distinction. It's not just about the volume of job. It's like, are they different? Is there variance as to the input required from a recruiter to hire that one thing? So, okay, real quick on this, Thom. I'm going to truncate this question because it's a little bit difficult to read. But I think Sandra said, what are the tools that you used when you're doing the setup from scratch scenario? Was there anything beyond the spreadsheet?
No, I think so. I mean, if you're setting up a sourcing team, LinkedIn is the biggest tool you're going to use. But I think in terms of running the team from a functional point of view, one of the things we did find difficult, and this is just a shout out to all the people who design and make ATSs. I still haven't seen an ATS that's well designed for a sourcing team to use, if I'm honest. So that's been difficult. So we have crowbarred our sourcing process into our existing ATS's function of talent pools versus recs, and it works, but it's not the way I put it together. And I've seen a million different versions, but I've never seen one that I think is natural. So there is a lot of work. There's been a lot of Excels for running the tracking of the team, a lot of Excels for the way in which we build work back plans for hiring managers in the business. So yeah, I'll probably, I spent more time constructing Excels than anything else.
That's it. Excel, folks. Microsoft Excel. Microsoft uses Microsoft Excel. You would not be surprised.
There you go.
Probably the most useful bit of software around. It has to be said. Okay, we can't get to the rest of the questions. We're well out of time. Welcome back, Damien.
Thanks, Jens. For me, it was a very insightful hour. Great techniques and insights on recruitment, and also especially how Microsoft has been doing it over the years. Question, Thom, is it the Highbury in the background or not?
Yes, it is. Yeah, that's the home of football, the old home of football. Absolutely, yeah. Good
exactly.
Spot.
Are you making a statement?
It is quite a good talking point. I didn't put it there to make a statement, but it's amazing the number of people who spot it. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, if you like football, it's great. I want to wrap up. I want to thank you both a lot. It's been very, very interesting. I want to share two more things with the attendees. First of all, the next session, February 18th. The link is in the chat right now. We'll be focusing on hypergrowth. We'll have a great set of TA leaders from highly paid companies all throughout Europe. Secondly, I want to emphasize the THC Slack. Everyone can learn and everyone can share. And I would love to have everyone in this community to share their best insights, best practices. I think that all together we can learn more about recruitment, improve our processes. Also, this link is now in the chat. And the third thing is a little bit of a teaser. We are going to organize also a tech hiring conference very soon. It's probably going to be a hybrid between offline and online events. Stay tuned, probably more information on the 18th. And once again, thank you so much. Thanks for the insights. Follow-up email will be sent out very briefly with the link to the recording and the link to the next session. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.